Thank you, and I just again want to thank all the witnesses this morning. And first, I'll just go to Madeleine, and I just fully support the implementation of the strategy. It seems that because there's been only 2 meetings from 2019 to 2021, they've only met twice, and there has been no meetings this year. So that would be the steering strategy, and I just think that is a real concern. And I would ask the committee today to actually write, that we as a committee and group would write to the Minister requesting that the committee write, and get this neurohabilitation strategy and the steering group back up and running. And I think timing is of the essence. And I would ask that from this today that we fully support that. And that is something I would put to the committee. I think the fact that there's over 26,000 members and children and adults. And what I would ask is, are we really aware of the different strands of disability, and have we actually got the correct data for this? Because the way we have all the different disabilities and everybody's trying to work together, so do you have proper data on that? That's one question I also want to ask. And how can we ensure disability awareness raising on the level that is needed by the UN CRPD across all sectors? I think we need to develop a disability awareness raising strategy in line with the human rights and social model of disability. And I think this is important, that we including rollout of all disability awareness trainings for all staff of government, and also like the departments of public bodies. And I think that's so important, because it's about everything. It's always about awareness, and it's all about training. And I know people in wheelchair and they can't even access buildings. And I think everybody needs some training. I think we need training, but I just think that for all of us to learn and be more aware. I had a lady contact me only about 3 weeks ago, and her daughter had a horrific her daughter was in a car accident with the mother, and she's left in a wheelchair for life. And she said to me she can't take her daughter down some footpaths. She can't bring her into buildings, and even getting information is another issue. And I just think these are the issues too that we need to sort. And I know another chap that contacted me, he's in hospital, and he has a very bad disability, and we can't get him home because there's no home care packages for him. So funding there, as you're saying, is a huge issue. And, we can't allow this to happen with the most vulnerable people in our society, people with disabilities. We have to make sure that there's funding there. And we have a duty of care to children and to adults with disabilities. And I think all of us working together, because sometimes I just feel myself, and maybe you come back to me on that, is there a lack of communication within different departments? I know you're saying there, you spoke about the housing there, which is brilliant, and it's great to see that you are working with the housing department. Look, we know ourselves, we're always, as councillors and TDs, we're constantly fighting for ramps, we're constantly fighting for adaptation grants, we're constantly fighting for bedrooms, heating, because, some people with disabilities find the cold and they need a lot of extra heating. And I think that we need to build more houses that are adapted to just specific disabilities. And then, of course, we need to give people the choice. Do they want to go into, maybe care? Do they want to stay at home? Do they want to go to daycare services? Or maybe even go into a service there that they can have both. So I just kind of feel myself that, we have a lot of a criteria to meet, but I think part of this has to be the strategy going forward, and we need to make sure that the Minister steps in here to do that. And maybe you could come back to me with some of those questions. I kind of mixed them up a bit, so hopefully Madeleine and Michael, you might be able to come back with some answers. Thank you.
Now, who wants to take that on behalf of the...
They're mixed, Michael. Yeah.
I can speak.
Michael Hennessy, do you want to come in? And
I might actually defer to one of my colleagues on the housing strategy, okay. Chairman, if you don't mind. Alison, you're on mute.
Alison.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I'm happy to speak a little bit about that. Deputy Murnane-O'Connor, I suppose there's a campaign that's currently underway to look for the revision of Part M of the building code, and one of the reasons for that is because currently our Part M is looking for a certain proportion of wheelchair visitable, I suppose, wheelchair accessible, and really without the accessibility becoming wheelchair livable. we won't be able to house people who have a disability, who have a need for wheelchair livable housing. So it's really important that universal design becomes a part of the design features of many of the houses into the future, so that as people's needs change and as people have accessibility needs, they can be met. So I suppose we would be calling, along with all of the other umbrella bodies and all of the advocacy groups, for review of Part M, so that there's a minimum amount of the supply pipeline that's coming down that actually has wheelchair livable rather than wheelchair visitable housing associated. And unless those targets are put in very real terms, our experience has been that there hasn't been wheelchair livable accommodation delivered to date. So I think that's potentially the area that you're looking at, is the revision of Part M, the delivery then within that of a pipeline of supply, because at the moment the supply is really not meeting the demand for accessible housing. If that addresses that question, yeah.
Okay. Is this? Who wants to come in there? Michael, do you want to come back in on the strategy? Sorry, Niall, is it Niall? Yeah. Okay, do you want to come in, Niall, there?
Yes, I'm happy to address some of those, and I can defer back to Max for some of those. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about these today. Where we are in relation to the neurological disability, it's in a very chaotic and unclear, unstructured position at the moment. So we don't have data on the number of people with any of these conditions. We have some minimal epidemiological data to give us the number of new cases maybe that might be diagnosed, but most of our data comes from international studies and extrapolations to Ireland. So we don't really have a very clear picture of the number of people currently living with neurological disabilities and the impact of those disabilities on their conditions. So I suppose one of the challenges that we have is that because there's no clear strategy for what happens once you are discharged from hospital, people fragment. Many of the people have to then either they disappear and they struggle on their own, which is what happens for many people. This is why many of the people describe themselves as being hidden, because they just disappear into the community and try and manage it with their family as much as they possibly can. And these are people who are living their lives in many cases and have suddenly had everything changed with a diagnosis or an injury or an illness that's been given to them. Other cases, many people then family members have to start Googling and try to find out the symptoms and where they can get treatment. Now, if you can think about any other illness or disease where you have to actually go and try and find what your symptoms and conditions are and what treatment you are, it's unheard of. If you had a cancer diagnosis, you wouldn't be saying, I need to go and find a radiation oncologist, I need to go and find a chemotherapy. Many of our patients with brain injury have to do this. They have to find out a neurophysio, a neuropsychologist, neurologist. I have epilepsy. I have mobility difficulties, balance problems, and they have to do that themselves. There's no consistent, coherent program where somebody slots into it and follows it through discharge into the community, transitional living units. I think we've one or two possibly in the community, into community neuro rehab, and then into long-term care. Where it's very haphazard, and it's also haphazard where you're living. So there are some spots, obviously in the east in Dublin and in Limerick, possibly in the southwest and Cork. But if you're a line really from the southeast up to the northwest, really there's very little services for you. So it depends where you're living as well, what access to. You might be discharged through a community team and have some resources. You may not, and in which case then it's up to you and your family to try and find this out. And not only are the family members trying to cope with the impact of the illness and disability, they're also then trying to find services and treatments for people. Some people try and get back to work after a couple of weeks after a major brain injury and everything falls apart and they lose their jobs. And some people never get back to work again. They never get back to education. So, and we know that the rehabilitation systems work. They can help people. They can structure people. The information that's given to them and the interventions that they get make a difference if they get them in a timely way. We actually even know from many of our studies internationally that even up to 40 years post-injury, you can still benefit from rehabilitation if you get it. I mean, some of the international data would suggest about 40% of people, of rough sleepers, have had a brain injury at some point and their lives have fallen apart because of lack of services. Prison populations have high rates of head injuries and brain injuries as well because of it. So we know that there's a cost to this, to people's capacity to live independently, to participate in society, and we need to facilitate, and we really need to get in with the rehabilitation structures that we know exist in the rest of the world. I hope that addressed some of those issues there.
Okay, thank you. Now, who else wants to come in from the witnesses? Michael. Okay, Michael.
Thank you. I just wanted to address part of Deputy Murnane-O'Connor's question around housing. In the development of the housing strategy, we are advocating that there be a proper provision for people with a disability. My colleague has addressed the issue of wheelchair accessibility, wheelchair livable. There are also other aspects to it because not all support needs are visible. People with autism may not have any visible physical needs. However, when it comes to housing, they also have particular needs. We'd be advocating for the fact that while we want the people we support to live in mainstream society, their houses should look no different than anybody else's. A person with autism, the built environment is actually critical in the provision of supports. A person with autism experiences life differently to other people. We must respect that. And that often requires the development of bespoke, either day service buildings or residential buildings to reflect the person's needs.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask Michael, one thing there. Do you find then when families are applying to the local authority for housing that autism is a criteria that is put maybe to the top of the list? Because you know yourself, I'm a firm believer that people, whether they have a medical or a disability or autism, like, are you finding that as an issue, or are you finding that working through the different housing groups that all, that people are being prioritised? Sorry, now, thank you.
What I'd say about that, I think it's a developing situation because the numbers of people who are seeking to access services, be those day services or residential services, who either have an autism diagnosis or particularly where autism is their primary need, even though there may be other issues, that number is increasing, and it is a challenge to develop services that actually meet that need. So I think it's an area that further work needs doing on, and it's something we're advocating for because, I go back to the point, not all support needs are visible, but that doesn't mean that they're not there.
Okay, thank you.